As for the previous Sundays, brothers and sisters, especially from St. George's and St. Albertus in Ottawa, I would like to share a few reflections, in place of a homily for this Sunday. I'm very grateful for all the comments and encouragements I have received in previous weeks. And so we will continue this, in a sense, as long as necessary and as long as it takes. This is now the 5th Sunday in Lent. And as we get closer to Easter, the themes of death and life, resurrection, in a sense, come more into focus. Normally, this is the Sunday where in the churches we would veil the crucifixes, the statues, the images of the saints. In the old liturgy, this is the beginning of Passiontide. So those weeks just before Easter, especially dedicated to looking at Christ's suffering. And again, this is a Sunday where, maybe you've heard it already, the Gospel at the Mass is rather long. On this Sunday, it is again from the Gospel of John. It is in chapter 11, the raising of Lazarus. Jesus goes to where his friends live, Martha, Mary, and their brother Lazarus, and there he finds his friend dead and buried. Cannot escape, I think, that this year the story is, in a sense, especially relevant, especially close to us. Because illness and also dying are more visible, more palpable. They are, in a sense, closer to us in the world around us. Maybe you remember from last week, where the Gospel was about the man born blind, who then miraculously receives his sight. Just what Jesus said then, very similarly he says now, as he prepares to go to Bethany, where Lazarus is, and he says, what will happen, what he will do, these miracles, they are not just in order to help an individual person, but he literally says it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Indeed, when he finally arrives in Bethany at the tomb, Lazarus is dead. You could say very dead, because he's been buried for 4 days. The sisters are still mourning, clearly. Mary, as she talks to Jesus, makes a big profession of faith. She says she believes that he, her brother, will rise again on the last day. But we feel that there is still sadness in her despite this faith. Right now, she's mourning. And indeed, could be a surprising moment in the Gospel. Jesus himself is mourning. Jesus himself is sad. We directly read that he weeps at the tomb of Lazarus. But then he asks that the tomb be opened. And people do it. And he calls out Lazarus, tells him to come out. He brings his friend, who had clearly been dead, back to life. Now you could look at this story, this episode, as something that is both helpful to the faith, a miracle, but you could also look at it as something that is, in a sense, dangerous. Dangerous for believing in the resurrection. Because what happens there to Lazarus, in a sense, seems to be exactly what will happen, not much later, you could say, to Jesus himself. Death, burial, tomb being open and then being empty, resurrection. It is dangerous, in fact, to think, if we begin to think, that what happens to Lazarus is more or less identical to what will happen to Jesus, who also will come back to life. We must not overlook the differences. Because Lazarus, he comes back very much to that life which he had before. That is not at all the case after the resurrection of Jesus. Lazarus returns to life on earth, surely transformed by this experience, but still a life that will end. He is still mortal, still capable of suffering, capable of sinning. When Christ rises, it is a whole new level of life. His body is no longer earthly but spiritual, totally transformed. The new life into which he enters, into which he rises from the dead, is eternal. He is then glorified. So what happens in this part of the gospel? When Lazarus is raised from the dead, is merely a sign of that resurrection which is to come. A sign that points to the resurrection of Jesus. And yet, Lazarus' new life and renewed life is a symbol of that resurrection. And it can become also for us, therefore, a sign of hope and something that we, in a sense, need to imitate. In a sense, we have already imitated. Because our lives are transformed. They are transformed by the fact that we have been baptized. In baptism, we have died with Christ and risen with him. And yet, we now live in this world. Our bodies, frail, fragile often, just as our societies and the structures of our life are often fragile. And yet, in virtue of the sacraments, and by our own conversion to Christ, by being unified with him, by belonging to the church, our lives are being transformed. Our life often, my life certainly often, is anything but glorified. But it is the beginning. It is the way that leads to the new life. The new life of heaven and the new life in heaven. The new life that is a life with God, in his presence, where we will see him face to face. If this is our hope, if this is our faith and conviction, even suffering in this world can be and will be redeemed. Every sin can be forgiven. Death itself is no longer a limit, is no longer an obstacle, but instead becomes the door that leads to that life. When we work for and you might say pray and strive for safety now, when we work and long for healing now, let us not forget that that also is but the beginning, but an image of that salvation and that safety that we will have in heaven. Let us not overlook, however, that this life now is part already of our life with God. It has to be. That hope, in fact, is what keeps us going, even in difficult, even in dark times. A hope that ultimately is not content with anything that on this earth is available, that on this earth is possible, but instead a hope that goes beyond. A hope that wants to show, wants to lead the way to the life of those who are fully redeemed, the life of the blessed in heaven. Amen.